The year is 2200. Humanity has mastered space travel and can currently dwell in homes placed in planetary orbit. Mommy is a young, attractive woman and a potter, passionate about her craft, working in her studio in one of these space-based houses. When her husband, Naoki, recommends she take a break, she washes her hands and goes out for dinner. Afterwards, she accepts a delivery brought by a cargo shuttle with the support of their household robot, Q. Immediately, she senses a ringing in her ears, and a frightening vision flashes before her eyes. Red streaks, and she herself lying in a pool of blood. But suddenly, her spouse calls her name and informs her they have an appointment with the doctor. Mommy assures him that she's all right. Nevertheless, when Naoki turns away, her face becomes concerned. She follows Naoki into a room outfitted with metaverse chairs that allow a person to fly to any point. She says she often confuses what's real and what's virtual. The device turns on, and Mommy discovers herself in a clinic where her spouse and the doctor are already waiting. She tells the doctor that her ears often ring and her head hurts. The doctor suspects she has post-traumatic disorder since she lost her memory after spending time in a coma caused by a head injury she received during a tsunami. Weirdly enough, Mommy doesn't remember the cataclysm at all. Later, Naoki gives an interview as the inventor of the first orbital habitats, which many of the planet's wealthy citizens have moved into. Looking at Earth from orbit, they can learn to cherish the world they left behind, and when the climate improves, individuals will return to their home planet. Meanwhile, Mommy admires the tomato crop in their greenhouse. The tomatoes look excellent. Q compels her and helps pick some greens for supper. Later, she meets Naoki with his favorite soup. She's delighted that her body remembers what she once knew how to do, and Naoki is thrilled. He didn't dare hope she would start cooking again. Mommy jots something down on a slip of paper. She explains to her spouse that she's opted to preserve a record of events. Maybe it will help her retrieve her memories and recall the moment they met, got married, and moved into a seaside house. After all, by all accounts, that was the happiest time of their marriage. For some reason, this thought troubles Naoki. He insists it's too soon for them to return to Earth and reminds her of the doctor's advice. Think about the future, not obsess over the past. Rejecting this counsel, Mommy remembers a rainy day when a drenched young man entered her residence carrying a backpack that contained the robot Q she was working with. Upon seeing him, she stepped out of the workshop and offered him shelter from the terrible weather under her roof. Staring at her pottery, Naoki was amazed and stated he wanted to acquire one of her vases, but Mommy considered it defective and simply gave it to him as a gift. In the present, they head to the bedroom, but then Naoki pushes her away. She doesn't realize what she did wrong, yet he refuses to explain. Mommy is astonished that her husband believes he understands her better than she knows herself. He agrees he knows his wife well and that she is not Mommy. Naoki raises a knife above her, and Mommy wakes up, disturbed. Mommy goes to the doctor and tells him about her nightmare. It was so realistic she's frightened to go back to sleep. The doctor wants her to forget it, believing it a sign of PTSD. He reminds her that it was Naoki who stood by her side all that time. The doctor himself thought it was meaningless and believed she would never regain consciousness, but Naoki never gave up, and when she finally woke, he was overwhelmed with pleasure. Mommy returns to reality and takes a shower, but when it gets even worse, she sees bleeding marks on the glass and her neck pains. Much later, her husband helps dry her hair and attempts to urge her. During the day, Mommy works in her studio, and when picking up a bowl, she unexpectedly remembers hitting someone with it. A hinged man had broken into her house, insisting she sell him some ceramics. When Mommy insisted it was too delicate, he started striking her. At that moment, Naoki ran at the intruder and began attacking him with savage violence. She couldn't stop him. Only after the man lost consciousness did Naoki back off. Mommy healed the cuts on his hands and thanked him for protecting her, but she asked him never to fight again, as it worried her immensely. Naoki promised that instead of him, Q would defend her. Giggling, Mommy continued inspecting Naoki's injury and noticed horrible burns on his sides and back. He revealed that his father was tremendously fond of cigars. Feeling sad, Mommy kissed him, and that was the beginning of their relationship. Currently, Naoki is examining his wife's psychological profile when he unexpectedly hears music from the living room. He goes there and observes Mommy asleep on the couch with a debut record playing on the turntable. Mommy notices him and reveals she really loves this melody, recalling it from beginning to end. Her spouse then suggests they look at the real moon. He brings her to an observation window, and Mommy is thrilled to see the moon is red. Naoki says it's due to a lunar eclipse, while she dreams of traveling on the moon, something that inexplicably unsettles him. He steps out of the airlock and seals her inside, repeating that she is not Mommy. At first, she chuckles, believing it's a joke, but then she realizes he's serious and starts to panic, especially when she sees he's prepared to open the outside door. With enormous effort, she forces the doors apart and makes it inside. Then, just like in her dream, Naoki raises a knife and rams it into her neck. Instead of blood, a white fluid pours out, and Naoki pulls a chip off the base of her neck, leaving the android's immobile corpse on the floor. He leaves, directing Q to dispose of the robot. Afterward, he weeps, recalling the night he found his wife's mutilated body on the shore. The next day, he goes to the doctor and admits he got rid of the android because it was flawed. The backup memory must have been corrupted. However, the doctor protests, claiming he installed the memory exactly from the day Naoki had mentioned. However, on that day, she couldn't have remembered that. Melody, Naoki asks him to develop yet another previous version. When the doctor attempts to argue, Naoki reminds him that there are plenty of specialists who can make memory transfers, so he can quickly go elsewhere. The doctor explains that the earlier version of Mayumi had been stored from a point after their honeymoon, hence, Nai wants an even earlier version. That way, she'll have no recall of that other woman, and if she doesn't believe the tsunami narrative, he'll tell her the truth, that she's an android. Later, a new Mayumi arrives at the orbiting home. When she comes to her senses, she has no idea where she is. Nai explains that they went out to make copies, but were in an accident, and she died. Mayumi refuses to believe it but then hesitates and asks how long it's been. Hearing that 5 years have passed, she leaps out of bed and rushes to the window, then suddenly calms down and lets him hug her. He thanks her for returning to him. The next day, Mayumi is at the workshop when her husband comes in and throws a cracker at her. Mayumi throws one back, they goof around, and then she shows him their wedding photo, confessing it was the happiest day throughout her life. He agrees, but reminds her that every other day was just as happy. Mayumi admits she feels as if she cheated death, but will it be enough for him to have simply a copy of her? Naoki confesses it's the best solution under the circumstances and proposes they travel somewhere together. In the next instant, they're traveling down a gorgeous road near trees, enjoying the sunshine and bird chirping. They stop at a little shrine. Mayumi suddenly observes a house nearby. She moves, approaching it, and seems to slip inside an earth bar where she meets a woman named Jab. Naoki calls her name, and the vision fades. They continue on to a beach house where they spent their honeymoon. Mayumi remembers the stuff in the living room, and they giggle about how Q once poked a hole in a column. It starts to rain, and Mayumi runs outside, letting the warm raindrops run on her face. Naoki catches up to her, but she abruptly recalls meetings with Jab, perceives the woman's face before her, and shouts out her name. Naoki's smile fades at the couple's return to their orbiting home. Mayumi feels anxious and tries to explain things. Her husband, however, takes her to ride the elevator to the top of a tower with little gravity. Floating, Mayumi forgets everything and basks in this strange pleasure just for once. She is accustomed to it, she tells her spouse. She can't stay here. He understood all along. She pretends she was seeing someone else. He doesn't understand since it doesn't matter now, but Mayumi insists it does. She loves Jab but can't be with him. Naoki embraces her and breaks the android's neck. He has another copy of her. His wife cries and remembers how, on one rainy day, she begged him not to injure her or use violence. He discovered she had found someone else and lost control. He was not a tough man, but Mayumi showed him bruises on her arm from his grip. Furious, Naoki ruined the furnishings. She remembered Jab the next day when Naoki found them in the living room. Listening to Ducey, his wife was in another woman's arms. Later, Mayumi told him she was leaving and tried to erase his hilarious image generated on a glass divider. Naoki went back to the doctor and asked him to utilize Mayumi's recollection from the day they initially met at their wedding and honeymoon. He wanted the remaining 6 years to be erased. He desired one last chance to win back his wife. As soon as the android arrived, Mayumi was at home, but this time frightened when she saw him, feeling she had awakened as a captive of a nearly random stranger. He reminded her that she had wanted to fly to space and described their wedding and lovely life together in the beach house, even though the current version contained no such memories. He thought she'd recognize him and fall in love with him again. He wouldn't force her to stay. Mayumi calmed down slightly and accepted to contribute. It's a possibility, he said. They had been quite pleased for 6 years. Then he wished her good night. However, Mayumi could not sleep. She looked around the room and saw a remark in the vanity warning that Naoki would kill her at that point. Her husband came in and told her he was going on business. When he returned, he would show her around the house. Mayumi searched for Q and inquired about the robot to assist her in escaping. Q directed her to take the elevator and ascend the tower. She didn't understand why the robot brought her there and wanted to know who wrote the warning. She then hears her own voice. Turning around, she finds a perfect clone of herself who acknowledges she's the author of that note. Startled, Mommy sees several copies of herself silently coming from all corners of the room. They describe that Q preserved them, but Naoki wrecked their identity, yet they preserve some traces of recollection, the same person, and now she has to save her previous versions. Q confesses that it can summon a transit shuttle, and Mommy indicates her copies should escape on it, but first, they need to exchange memories. The androids begin the process, and time rewinds to that evening when Naoki finds Mommy packing her suitcase. Naoki urges her to stay, but she shows him the wounds on her skin. He always vowed not to damage her again, and she always trusted him, but it kept happening. Maybe it's because he suffered in childhood, but she can't endure it anymore. She steps into the yard, but he gets up to her, spotting the knife. Mommy panics and climbs onto the parapet. Naoki drops the blade yet pushes her. Mommy falls from the height and dies. He discovers her body on the coast and weeps over it. In the present, Noi comes for supper and sees his wife made his favorite soup. Yet how did she know? He discovers her taped neck. It's a previous version of Mommy. The android flees. Meanwhile, the latest Mommy continues trading memories with her replicas. Naoki hunts down the previous version, cornering her in the greenhouse. Briefly tricks him but is eventually dead. He enters the elevator, but Mommy, notified of his approach, instructs Q to stop him. The robot disables the elevator, forcing Naoki to climb the shaft. Meanwhile, Mommy arms herself, preparing to trap him in the airlock. She thanks Q. It's the last remnant of humanity left in her husband. Reaching the tower, Naoki lunges at Mommy. She retreats, escorting him into the airlock, but he escapes before the doors close and seizes her. Q intervenes, reminding him of his former command to protect her. He tries to attack again, but the androids grab him, and Mommy throws a knife that hits Naoki in the chest. He falls as the copies silently observe him. Mommy says they will never forgive him. He wrecked everything. He immediately recalls how they used to dream about living in a space house, then drew photographs of it on a glass partition. He weeps. Mommy helps him up and escorts him to the shuttle, but he suddenly shoves her inside and shuts the door behind her. As Mommy goes, Naoki steps into space with Q's help. On Earth, at the beach house, Jab greets Mommy with tea. She confesses feeling as if she's lost part of her memory. Jab reassures her that it happens to everyone. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, leave a comment about your favorite movie, and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.